Do not be alarmed. The sirens you are about to hear are not real.
First responders raced to the desperate scene in upstate New York Saturday afternoon. A catastrophic limousine crash.
20 fatalities is just horrific. I've been on the board for 12 years, and this is one of the biggest loss of lives that we've seen in a long, long time.
The guys jumped off the truck. They grabbed the jaws. I fired the jaws up. They went down there. Within 2 minutes, they had that car open. We were pulling bodies out. They were still alive. And we kept going. Trained and trained and trained, and this is not what we're trained to deal with, is the aftermath. The things we saw was like a nightmare. I don't want anybody to see this. I just wish we get some support.
What they had to deal with here the other night is just unfathomable. It's one of the toughest things I've ever seen in my entire life.
The greatest single highway death total in this country in 14 years.
Hey there, guys. I'm Holly, the host of this podcast, All Available Units Respond, about disasters and catastrophes. I'm really sorry that this episode is super late, but I'm still trying to find my groove here, and I have to change new episode releases to every other Friday. I quickly learned that I just couldn't keep up doing it weekly. I never would have imagined that doing a podcast would be so much work. The research and writing take me a lot of time. So after that, then you have to record, edit, post, and promote it. And for those of you who don't know, this is my second podcast. I'd love it if you guys would check out my other podcast. It's called Tell Me a True Crime Story, and you can listen to it anywhere. It has 11 episodes so far. So I just wanted to, before we start with this case today, I just wanted to let you know that I woke up today with a little bit of a cough, and I'm feeling really crappy right now. It's now midnight, and I'm recording because that's when it's quiet around here and the dogs aren't going crazy and all that. So I might not do as much editing as I usually do, taking out like weird little mouth sounds and all that, because I think it's just going to be pointless because I sound kind of bad anyway. So I'm just going to roll with it, and you guys forgive me if I sound extra terrible. And yeah, so I just wanted to let you know if I sound funny and I feel like I'm not breathing, that's why. Or if I'm breathing too much. So just wanted to let you know because I seem to be clearing my throat a lot and stuff too. Anyway, so my other podcast has 11 episodes, and I'd love it if you would check that out. That would really help me a lot. It's called Tell Me a True Crime Story. I think I already said that, and you can listen to it anywhere. So last week, right here, I brought you the story of the Hyatt Regency Hotel tragedy. No, that was not last week. That was last episode is what I meant to say. So that was the Hyatt Regency Hotel tragedy. And in episode 2, I covered the Station nightclub fire. And in episode 1, I told you the story of the Big Bayou Connaught rail accident. So if you haven't listened to those, please go back and listen to episodes 1, 2, and 3. And I want to thank you so much for being here and spending some of your day with me. I truly, truly, truly appreciate you guys. And I hope that you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope that you're having a great holiday season. And I hope that you and your family are happy, healthy, and safe. Big hugs to all of you. So, for the recounting of this story, I relied heavily on the 2020 National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, the report on this incident, their official report. So, our episode today takes us back 4 years to Saturday, October 6th, 2018, to upstate New York in Schoharie, which is about 3 hours north of New York City. I'm going to tell you about the weather in this area on this day too because it's pertinent to the story. Historical weather data for October 6th, 2018 shows that it was 67 degrees Fahrenheit and there was no rain. And it wasn't particularly windy. The sky was overcast, and so there wasn't much glare from the sun. And, that's going to matter later. Like I said, it's pertinent, and we'll find out why later. But the sun wasn't glaring a whole lot because the sky was overcast and cloudy, and the roadways were dry. So 53-year-old Scott Lisinickia was born in the Bronx, New York, and lived near the resort town of Lake George, New York, with his wife, Kim. He had been driving a limo part-time for Prestige Limousine for several years. On Saturday, October 6th, 2018, a little after 9 a.m., Scott Lisinickia received a call from his boss, Nauman Hussein of Prestige Limousine. Nauman Hussein wanted him to take the Ford Excursion limo out on a job that day. Scott Lisinickia preferred driving the other limos owned by Prestige. He didn't like driving the Excursion limo, and you're going to find out why. He had, Scott, he had a CDL license. He had driven tractor trailers in the past. By law, though, by New York state law, he should have had a passenger endorsement on his license, which would have allowed him to drive 15 or more passengers, which he did not have. But clearly, he can drive a stretch limousine if he has a CDL and he has driven tractor trailers in the past. But, by law, he should have had the passenger endorsement, but he didn't. So just wanted to let you know that was in the report. So I'm stating that here too. So Amy Steenberg was turning 30, and her husband Axel rented a party bus to take a group of their close friends and family to celebrate at Ommegang Brewery in Cooperstown, New York. He'd put a deposit down on a party bus because he didn't want anyone driving after they'd been drinking. They thought they were doing the safe thing by hiring a driver. However, this trip would turn out to be anything but safe. The party bus that Axel had initially reserved broke down, so he scrambled to reserve something else that would accommodate all 17 of them. He booked what was available at the last minute. It was a white stretch 2001 Ford Excursion XLT SUV limousine that could fit 18 people. Now, let's talk about this Ford Excursion and the modifications that were made to it that turned it into a stretch limo. The original length of the Excursion before it was modified was almost 19 feet long, and it weighed 8,600 pounds. To make it into a limo, it was stretched to almost 31 feet in length. This was done by cutting the original factory frame and welding 12 additional feet of frame rail onto it to extend it. Once it was altered to this design, it met the definition of a bus. On October 6, 2018, the limo, with 18 occupants, weighed an estimated 13,565 pounds. Inside of the limo, there were bench seats arranged around the perimeter of the vehicle so that passengers would face each other. There was a refreshments bar towards the back of the vehicle and neon lights on the ceiling. The owner allowed passengers to smoke in the back area if they wanted to, like where the passengers sit. I guess people could smoke back there if they wanted to. So there are these companies that alter original factory vehicles into stretch limousines. And since 1989, Ford has provided guidance to these vehicle alterers who work with Ford vehicles. The program run by Ford is called the Qualified Vehicle Modifier Program. The program is voluntary for the alterers, but following the program ensures that the final altered vehicle is safe. Other vehicle manufacturers have similar programs. For instance, Cadillac's is called the Master Coach Builder Program. Most of the companies that perform vehicle alterations are involved in these programs. So, in 2002, according to Ford's safety guidelines to qualified vehicle modifiers, the suggested maximum acceptable passenger capacity was 15 passengers, and the maximum acceptable weight was 11,000 pounds. Additional safety elements were included in this guidance from Ford, such as roof and side emergency exits. Since 2020, Ford states that only Lincoln MKT town cars are approved for conversion into limos. Ford's guidance also called for the installation of a chassis upgrade kit, which included a brake hydro boost kit, higher load capacity tires, and a new rear spring assembly. Front springs were to be upgraded based on the length of stretch and the weight added. The brake system components of the limo in our story today showed no obvious modifications or alterations from the original system installed by Ford. In other words, the brake system had not been upgraded. The limo changed hands several times since it was originally manufactured in 2001. The owner of the limo at the time our story takes place in 2018 was Prestige Limousine. They'd purchased it 2 years earlier in 2016. And just 2 days before our story takes place, Prestige Limousine listed the limo for sale on Craigslist for $9,000. So, the tight-knit group of 17 family members and friends headed to the birthday celebration included the following people. 26-year-old Amanda Halse. She was a plant lover and a waitress at a retirement community. 31-year-old Patrick Cushing. He was on the U.S. men's dodgeball team, and he was employed with the New York State Senate. 34-year-old Michael Ukaj. He was also celebrating his birthday. He was a collector of arcade games, and he had just bought himself a pinball machine as a birthday present to himself. He was a Marine and had done a tour in Iraq. He'd inherited a house from his grandmother that he was in the process of fixing up. And then there was 34-year-old Erin McGowan. She was a newlywed, and she was married to Shane McGowan. She'd just gotten married to him 5 months prior to when this story takes place. She was an administrative assistant at St. Mary's Healthcare in Amsterdam, and she loved to travel and loved the ocean. Amsterdam, New York, that is, not Amsterdam. Amsterdam, New York. 30-year-old Shane McGowan was her husband, and he was an avid golfer, enjoyed video games, and he loved the New York Yankees. 34-year-old Abby Jackson was married to Adam Jackson and was the mom of 2 daughters who were 4 years old and 16 months at the time our story takes place. She was a teacher for the Amsterdam School District. Adam Jackson, who was the same age as his wife, 34, he had been married to Abby for 8 years. He was a deputy commissioner of the Montgomery County Board of Elections. He loved Star Wars, the Yankees, the New York Giants, Duke basketball, and movies. Amy Steenberg was 29 years old, and she's the one that everybody is going to celebrate her birthday, and she's turning 30 in a few days. She was actually the youngest of 4 sisters that were in the limo that day. Amy's sisters that were also there that day were Mary Dyson, Abigail Jackson, and Allison King. Amy had a nursing degree, a psychology degree, and was working on a master's degree. Their neighbors remembered Amy and her husband Axel as being very helpful, ambitious, and so in love with each other. They had a bull mastiff dog named Lady. So Axel Steenberg was Amy's husband, and he was 29. He worked at a semiconductor plant for Global Foundries and had participated in fitness competitions with their friend, Matthew Coons. Before they climbed into the limo that day, Axel sat gifts for Amy on the kitchen counter. He placed the bottles of wine and a card strategically so that she would see them first thing when she walked in the door that night when they returned from the birthday celebration. Rich Steenberg was 34 years old, and he was Axel's brother. He had a wife, a 10-year-old daughter, and a 14-year-old stepson. His wife was actually supposed to go to the birthday celebration too, but she ended up not going because she was not feeling good. Rich Steenberg also worked at Global Foundries, the same place his brother Axel worked. Mary Dyson was 33 and the sister of Amy Steenberg. She was married to Bob Dyson, and together they had a son named Isaac. She'd been a captain in the U.S. Army and had served in Iraq. She was a co-owner of Upstate Construction Company. So her husband was Rob Dyson, and he was 34. If he was married to Mary, that made him the brother-in-law of Amy Steenberg. He and Mary had a son named Isaac, as I stated, and Rob enjoyed sports, gaming, and building computers in his spare time. Allison King was 31, and she was the sister of Amy Steenberg. She wasn't too thrilled about going to the birthday celebration because she'd been abstaining from drinking in order to support her fiancé, who was giving up alcohol. And then there was Amanda Rivenberg. She was 29. She was an assistant director of the day program at Living Resources. And Living Resources provides services to individuals challenged by intellectual and developmental disabilities and brain injury survivors. She was a New York Mets baseball fan. Rachel Cavassi, she was 30. She was a dental hygienist and a sports enthusiast. She refereed many levels of lacrosse, basketball, and soccer. Matthew Coons was 27. He competed in fitness competitions with Axel Steenberg, and he was the boyfriend of Savannah Bercese. Savannah Bercese was 24, and she was saving up money to pursue a law degree in Texas. She was a fitness buff and an animal lover. So on Saturday, October 6th, 2018, all of these guys and gals gathered at the Steenberg home in Amsterdam, New York, where the limo was going to pick them up. They had a reservation for noon at the brewery, but they were going to be late. The limo was there to pick them up around 1:30 p.m. So presumably they were going to be late getting to the brewery because Axel had initially rented that party bus, but it broke down. So then they had to find another limo, and that's why they were going to be late. So no one really knows why, but the limo driver, Scott Lissanikia, took a meandering out-of-the-way route to the brewery. There was a much more direct route he could have taken via I-90, and it would have taken them about an hour to get to their destination. However, Mr. Lissanikia chose a rural, roundabout way to go, which took them through the rolling Schoharie Valley. On this particular route, it was hilly, and there were lots of curves and changes in vertical grade. He did take the interstate I-90 west for about 10 miles, but then he got off and went south on New York State Route 30A for about 17 miles. Then he turned left and went east on New York State Route 7 for a couple of miles. Then he turned south again onto New York State Route 30. A witness observed that Scott Lissanikia began to drive hesitantly, as if he were trying to figure something out. About 1:50 p.m., shortly after making the turn onto Route 30, the limo was observed moving toward the right shoulder with its hazard lights on. The reason for the limo moving toward the shoulder could not be determined, but the witness did say that the limo was inching forward even though it had its backup lights on. The witness put down their window as they drove past and heard the beeping of the limo's backup alarm. The limo driver looked confused or frazzled. After pulling onto the roadway again, the limo then began a descent from the top of a ridge 1.81 miles down to an oversized stop sign located at a T intersection where New York State Route 30 intersects with New York State Route 30A. The change in elevation from the top of the ridge to the bottom at the intersection is 573 feet. That's about equivalent to the height of a 50-story building. The grade varies along this stretch of road, but at its steepest, the grade is 11.35%. And I know most of you are probably like, so what the heck does that mean, 11.35% grade? It doesn't sound like that much, right? Well, I went on YouTube and watched a video of a truck driver going down a road with a 9% downhill grade, and it looked pretty steep and scary. So the posted speed limit on this road is 55 miles per hour, but it's easy to pick up speed because of the road's steep grade. Halfway down its descent, the road narrows and curves. There are 3 hill warning signs posted in advance of the descending grade. The New York Department of Transportation banned trucks from using that section of the road in 2015, 3 years prior to when our story takes place. As the limo drove along from Amsterdam toward their destination, some of the occupants within began sending texts to people about the condition of the vehicle. At about 1:37 p.m., Erin McGowan texted her best friend and said that the limo they were in was making a racket and that it was no quote-unquote luxury limo. She said that the motor was making everyone deaf and texted 5 crying from laughing so hard emojis. Then she texted, quote, "When we get to brewery, we will all be deaf," end quote. At 1:40 p.m., Allison King texted her fiancé and said that the brakes were burning and they were coasting. Other texts sent from people within the limo included, quote, "The limo sounds like it's going to explode," end quote, and, quote, "Yes, ha ha, it's a junker, literally," end quote. At 1:51 p.m., Abby Jackson texted her mother-in-law who was watching her 2 young daughters to check on them. Now we're going to talk about a couple of other gentlemen in our story. 46-year-old Brian Huff was well educated. He had a master's degree from Idaho State University and a doctorate degree from the University of Rochester. He worked as an assistant professor of geology at the State University of New York at Oswego. He taught oceanography and all kinds of archaeological courses, including stratigraphy, geology, and paleontology. Stratigraphy is the study of Earth's rock layers. Geology is the study of Earth's physical structure, substances, and materials. And paleontology is the study of the history of life on Earth as reflected in fossils. Brian enjoyed outdoor activities such as hiking, biking, and rock climbing. He was also a professional beer league hockey player. And for those of you who are like, what the heck is beer league hockey? A beer league hockey team is a team that competes in a recreational ice hockey league. I had to look that up. I had no idea what it was. And no, they do not drink beer while playing. I know, I was wondering that too. The name beer league just comes from the long-standing tradition of players going to drink a few beers together after their games. So, according to Brian's brother, JT, Brian was the very best uncle ever to his many nieces and nephews and would even take them fossil hunting at waterfalls and creek beds. Brian lived in Moravia, New York with his wife, Jackie Schnurr, and their 9-year-old son, Ben. He and Jackie had been married about a decade, and she was also a professor teaching at Wells College in Aurora, New York. Brian and his 2 brothers grew up in Boiling Springs, Pennsylvania. Sadly, his brother Todd died 3 years earlier in 2015 from melanoma. Tragically, as you will learn, their parents would soon have to bury another son. 70-year-old James Schnurr was Brian's father-in-law. I couldn't find too much info on Mr. James Schnurr, but at the time of our story in 2018, James and his wife Joan lived in a remote area outside of Kerhonkson, New York. James was a carpenter and a Marine veteran. His neighbor described him as a good man. On Saturday, October 6th, 2018, Brian, Jackie, their son Ben, and Brian's in-laws were headed to Jackie's cousin's wedding. They were caravanning in several different cars. Just before 2 p.m., the group stopped at the Apple Barrel store and cafe in Schoharie, New York, to stretch their legs and possibly get something to eat. The Apple Barrel store and cafe is a popular upstate New York destination that sits at the intersection of Route 30 and Route 30A. Reportedly, many people stop off here while going apple picking in the area or while out looking at the fall foliage. The store originally started as a farm stand at the end of World War II. The Apple Barrel website states, quote, "Today, Apple Barrel encapsulates nearly 6,000 square feet and features the best in home decor, gifts, fashion, gourmet food products, and an award-winning cafe," end quote. Think of a Cracker Barrel. From the pictures online, it looks like the same type of vibe, and like they sell the same kinds of things. Their cafe menu items sound delicious too. So they stopped at the Apple Barrel, and a family member took Brian and Jackie's son Ben into the store. Brian and his father-in-law James and Jackie stayed outside near the vehicles. They could never have imagined that within a few moments, 2 out of the 3 of them would be killed in a most unexpected way. Meanwhile, the limo with 1 driver and 17 passengers was racing, picking up significant speed coming down the steep grade on Route 30 as it approached the intersection at Route 30A, where the Apple Barrel store and cafe sits. As the limo neared the bottom of the hill where the stop sign is, there was a 2016 Jeep Patriot SUV with 2 occupants in the same lane as the limo waiting at the stop sign. Now, remember, this is a T intersection, which means that the Jeep Patriot SUV was at the end of the road they were on. This Jeep Patriot in front of the limo had to stop at the stop sign and turn either left or right onto Route 30A. But they had to wait until it was clear on 30A to make their turn because the traffic on 30A did not have a stop sign and did not have to stop. If you went straight, you would enter the driveway of the parking lot of the Apple Barrel store. The driver of the Jeep Patriot SUV looked in the rearview mirror and saw the limo flying toward them from behind. They reported hearing that as the limo approached, it sounded like a quote-unquote jet engine. The limo driver steered left to avoid slamming into the back of the Jeep SUV, soared past the stop sign and through the intersection. The limo crossed through the east and westbound travel lanes of Route 30A. Witnesses at the intersection at the time later reported that the limousine did not slow as it neared and proceeded through the intersection. The limo, by this time, was going at an estimated 101 to 118 miles per hour as it entered the driveway of the parking lot of the Apple Barrel and struck a 2015 Toyota Highlander SUV that was parked in a grassy field next to the driveway of the store. The 4,100-pound Toyota SUV was propelled forward 80 feet and struck Brian Hoff and his father-in-law, James Schnurr, who were standing near it. The speed of the limo was reduced to 80 miles per hour as it continued about 55 feet into a ravine and then struck an embankment and several trees. It had been traveling in a southerly direction, but when it finally came to rest, it was facing west. It ended up in a stream bed at the bottom of the ravine with the driver's side against the back slope of the ravine. The first 911 call was received at 1:55 p.m. by the Schoharie County Office of Emergency Services. At 1:56 p.m., units from the Schoharie County Sheriff's Office, Schoharie County Volunteer Fire Department Fire Rescue, and EMS were dispatched to the scene. At 1:59 p.m., the first units arrived at the scene. At 2:00 p.m., the incident was upgraded to a Level D mass casualty incident, which invoked a mutual aid, multi-agency response of a variety of public, volunteer, and private emergency medical services. A mass casualty incident is an event that places a significant demand on local medical and emergency resources and personnel in a short amount of time. Mass casualty incidents can quickly overwhelm the local healthcare system, depending on the number and severity of casualties, and can rapidly exhaust available resources. Agencies surrounding Schoharie that responded to the scene included resources from the Central Bridge Fire District, Esperance Volunteer Fire Department, Schoharie Ambulance Service, and LifeNet of New York, as well as several medical helicopters. Of the 20 total crash victims, 2 of the limo passengers initially survived the impact. The driver died on impact. 15 of the limo passengers also died on impact, as did the 2 men that were standing in the parking lot of the Apple Barrel. The 2 survivors from the limo were transported by ambulance from the scene to Cobleskill Regional Hospital. One of them was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. The other patient was transferred via medical helicopter to the Advanced Trauma Center at Albany Medical Center and was later pronounced dead there. A New York State Police report states the cause of death for all 20 victims of the crash was multiple severe traumatic blunt force injuries. An article in Intelligencer by Ben Ryder-Ho stated, quote, "None of the passengers had been wearing seat belts, and their bodies broke against the walls, the ceiling, and one another. The carnage was so extreme that veteran paramedics attending the crash site developed disabling mental health issues," end quote. Sometime after 2 p.m., then 70-year-old Linda King, who is the mom of 4 of the women that were in the limo, saw a breaking news story on her Facebook feed about the horrible crash. Initially, she and her husband, then 72-year-old Tom King, weren't too worried because the news said that it was a wedding party that had been in the limo. They didn't know it yet, but that was just a reporting mistake. It had been her family in that limo. The Kings texted their daughters but received no response. That's when they started to worry. At 6:28 p.m., their phone rang. The woman on the line was frantic. There had been a limousine accident, she said, and passed the phone to a state police trooper. The trooper told Tom King that the limo carrying his 4 youngest daughters had crashed near an intersection in rural Schoharie. Tom King asked if there were any survivors. The trooper replied, quote, "No, they were all killed," end quote. And just like that, they'd lost 4 of their 7 children, and they were now grandparents to 3 orphans. Nauman Hussein was informed about the crash by a call from a state trooper, too. He asked the officer on the line if the call was a prank. Now remember, Nauman Hussein is the owner. He was in charge of the day-to-day operations of Prestige Limousine, who owned the limo that crashed. So Nauman Hussein refunded $1,475 to Axel Steenberg's credit card, the husband who'd rented the limo for his wife's birthday celebration. Nauman Hussein was later arrested during a traffic stop and charged with criminally negligent homicide. Inside his vehicle, police found an application for a passport and a shredded out-of-service sticker that had been placed on the windshield of the limo by the state inspector the month prior. Nauman Hussein had removed the sticker and put the excursion limo back on the road. Then the 28-year-old professional paintball player went a few weeks later to Florida to compete in the 2018 Paintball World Cup. The National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, investigated and surveyed the crash. I'm going to go over some of their findings listed in their official highway accident report. First, I'm going to go over the damage to the vehicles involved in the accident, the Toyota Highlander SUV that the limo struck, and then the damage to the limo. Thankfully, the Toyota Highlander was not occupied at the time it was hit. It sustained extensive rear-end impact damage. The rear axle and body structure were pushed forward, decreasing the overall length of the vehicle by approximately 4 feet. There was additional contact damage and rearward displacement to the SUV's hood. The leading edge and upper surface of the hood showed distinct areas of direct contact. The upper radiator support and surrounding features showed rearward displacement. The front windshield was broken, with the cracks showing characteristics of damage from direct contact with the ground. As you can imagine, the limo that had been going about 101 to 118 miles per hour when it first struck the Toyota Highlander and about 80 miles per hour when it struck the earthen embankment and trees sustained severe damage to its front end. It was more deformed on the driver's side. The left side front of the vehicle was pushed rearward about 5 feet. The left wheel was displaced rearward more than 4 feet and ended up right by the driver's seat. The engine was pushed down and rearward into the driver's footwell or floorboard. The steering wheel was pushed rearward and upwards toward the vehicle's roof. There was a complete loss of occupant survival space for the driver and front passenger seating positions. There was a partial intrusion into the left front corner of the rear passenger compartment, meaning the area behind the driver where all of the partygoers were sitting, but most of the passenger space remained relatively intact. And this just meant that the passenger area was mostly uncompromised in the crash. The loss of life occurred from the impact of the collision, causing the passengers' bodies to be thrown about inside the vehicle, which caused the severe traumatic blunt force injuries that resulted in their deaths. The driver, Mr. Scott Lisinickia, took evasive steering maneuvers to avoid crashing into the back of the Jeep Patriot that was stopped at the stop sign. The investigation found no evidence that he would not have applied the brakes. Cell phone records show that the driver was not using his cell phone during the trip to make phone calls or to text. New York State troopers that were examining the limo right after the crash reported a strong odor of overheated brakes at the scene. However, there were no skid marks on the road at the intersection. The available information suggested catastrophic brake system failure as a potential cause of the accident. Therefore, the NTSB conducted a visual inspection of the brake system components and performed brake performance testing on an exemplar vehicle. An exemplar vehicle just means that it's as close a representation to the original vehicle as possible. At the time of the crash, the limo had 194,000 miles on it. The NTSB conducted a visual examination of the limo's body after the crash, which revealed numerous and significant areas of sheet metal rust. The exterior floorboard was severely deteriorated and rusted through the underbody, exposing the interior carpeting. The entire frame of the vehicle was rusted and corroded, including the underbody structural supports and chassis support gussets. The rear spring suspension showed evidence of corrosion. The limo had 3 different brands of tires on it. The left front tire was over 10 years old and not the proper size that was recommended. There was significant wear to the transmission bushings, and the forward clutch friction disc showed very little friction remaining. The steel brake line was corroded and coated in brake fluid, which indicated a leak. It appeared that this was a pre-existing condition and not as a result of crash damage. The brake line tubing also had a crimp in it, downstream of the oil flow, thereby reducing the amount of brake fluid that could flow to the rear brakes. There was evidence that this crimp was also a pre-existing condition. Both brake calipers and slide pins had corrosion. The 2 pistons on the right rear caliper were seized or frozen in place. Both rear rotors were corroded and there were grooves in the rotor surfaces. The right rear disc pads were corroded and the friction material wear was uneven. The front brakes smelled burned. The front brake pads were corroded and had uneven wear patterns, glazing, and deterioration of the friction surfaces. The brake rotors were corroded. The surfaces of the rotors had friction material from the pads embedded in them. The limo had an ABS or anti-lock braking system. New York State Department of Transportation inspection records of the limo from March of 2018 and September of 2018 noted that the ABS warning light for the limo remained on when it was in motion. According to Ford, when the ABS warning light is on, it indicates that the ABS is disabled and service is needed. Prestige owned other limos in their fleet, and they were visually inspected after the accident. The inspections of those limos revealed that all three were poorly maintained, they had extensive corrosion throughout, the floorboards in all of the vehicles had disintegrated through to the interior carpet in multiple locations. The New York State Police inspections of the limousines revealed numerous safety violations for each vehicle. The NTSB report stated in their conclusions that, quote, none of the following were factors in this crash. 1. The driver's experience or familiarity with the limousine. 2. Roadway signage. 3. Alcohol impairment or fatigue. 4. Cell phone use. 5. Weather conditions. Or 6. Visibility and stopping sight distance at the intersection where the crash occurred. End quote. Now I'm going to read you the probable cause statement directly from the NTSB Highway Accident Report. Quote, the National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of the Schoharie, New York crash was Prestige Limousine and Chauffeur Services' egregious disregard for safety in dispatching a stretch limousine with an out-of-service order for a passenger charter trip, resulting in the failure of its brake system while descending the steep grade of New York State Route 30. Contributing to the crash was the New York State Department of Transportation's ineffective oversight of Prestige Limousine, despite its knowledge of the carrier's multiple out-of-service violations and lack of operating authority, as well as the department's inadequate repair verification process. Further contributing to the crash was the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles' inadequate oversight of state-licensed inspection stations and its failure to properly register the limousine, which enabled Prestige Limousine to circumvent the state's safety regulations and more rigorous inspection requirements. End quote. Prestige Limousine was owned by Shahed Hussain, and the day-to-day operations were handled by his son Nauman Hussain. Shahed Hussain was in Pakistan, therefore Nauman Hussain had to face the fallout and consequences from the crash on his own. According to a 2022 article by Ben Ryder Ho of the Intelligencer magazine, quote, Nauman Hussain's father, Shahed, the owner of Prestige Limousine, was a long-time confidential informant for the FBI and one of the most notorious operatives in the agency's history, end quote. Now, is this why the limo somehow always ended up back on the road despite its violations and failed inspections? The limo had just failed a state inspection 1 month prior to this deadly accident. And it had failed an inspection 6 months prior to that for a long list of problems, included corroded and compromised brakes. And because of its size, the extra-large Excursion should have been subjected to even tougher inspections by the state, but the Hussains avoided that state law by lying about the limo's alteration and seating capacity on reports. 1 year they stated that the seating capacity was 11. The next year they stated that it was 8 people, and the year after that they stated that it was 10 people. So they disregarded state inquiries about whether its drivers were drug tested and about its out-of-service rate. The out-of-service rate is how often inspectors deemed its fleet vehicles unsafe to drive. Prestige's out-of-service rate was 80%, which is 13 times the industry standard. And the Department of Transportation knew Prestige Limousine was a threat. The NTSB Highway Accident Report counted 32 times the DOT had interacted with Prestige but failed to act. That excursion limo should have been seized and impounded many times over. Take the keys and throw them away, burn them, burn the car. I don't understand how this could have happened. It's just crazy. So, according to the Intelligencer article, Larry Rulison, who has been a reporter for the Albany Times-Union since 2005, has written many, many articles based on documents exposing government agencies' records of leniency toward the Hussein family. Well, Larry Rulison said, he's the reporter, he said that the Husseins get a lot of mysterious breaks. Here's another example of their alleged preferential treatment. Prestige Limo was run out of a motel in Wilton, New York, owned by Harris Hussein, Nauman Hussein's older brother. Well, that motel had racked up many code violations. Raw sewage from the cabins ran into a muddy field, electrical wiring and gas lines were exposed, and there was $30,000 in unpaid property taxes on the motel. A 5-year-old even fell into an unsecured septic tank on the property and almost died. And there was a fatal shooting at the motel in 2018. Only after all the extra scrutiny placed on the Husseins after the limo crash was the hotel finally shuttered by the Department of Health, citing fire hazards, structural hazards, a sewage failure, and water quality concerns. In 2021, Nauman Hussein pleaded guilty to 20 counts of criminally negligent homicide. Judge George R. Bartlett III accepted a plea deal negotiated between the DA and Nauman Hussein's defense attorneys in 2022 that gave him 5 years of probation and 1,000 hours of community service. He would not get any jail time under the agreement. Crash victims' families were understandably very unhappy about this. They really felt cheated. Well, Judge George R. Bartlett III retired, and along came his replacement, the extremely honorable State Supreme Court Justice Peter Lynch, who threw out the plea agreement. He said the arrangement was fundamentally flawed and called the plea deal, quote, completely disingenuous and unacceptable to this court, end quote. He gave Nauman Hussein a choice between withdrawing his guilty plea and going to trial or going to prison. Nauman Hussein chose to go to trial, and his trial date is now set for May 1st, 2023. In October of 2022, the Honorable Judge Peter Lynch denied Nauman Hussein's attorney's request to remove his ankle monitor, stating that having the ankle monitor is necessary to guarantee the defendant shows up for court. In November of 2022, Nauman Hussein's attorneys filed a lawsuit suing Judge Peter Lynch in order to have the original plea deal reinstated. Judge Peter Lynch issued a response through his attorney. Part of that response reads, quote, Judge Lynch acted within his judicial authority in determining the previously negotiated sentence was not appropriate and would not serve the interest of justice based upon all information available to him at the time of sentencing, end quote. There have been some civil settlements already made in this case, but other civil litigation is still ongoing. In 2020, new laws were passed in New York thanks to pressure from crash victims' families. Included in the laws are a requirement for drug and alcohol testing of limo drivers and a requirement that drivers have a CDL if carrying 9 or more passengers. There are increased penalties for drivers who make illegal U-turns in limos. The new laws require stretch limousines to have seatbelts and all passengers over 8 years of age to wear a seatbelt. The laws also ensure that defective or unsafe limos are impounded or immobilized until they pass a new inspection. Limos will have GPS too. In the days following the accident, a makeshift memorial was erected outside of the Apple Barrel Country Store and Cafe for the victims of the horrible crash. 20 wooden crosses were nailed to a vertical wooden plank. Messages were scrawled on each cross from friends and family members of the victims. The nonprofit Reflections Memorial Foundation was soon created to raise funds to build a permanent memorial. In October 2019, a year after the accident, the permanent memorial was unveiled. It featured 20 square stones with the names and birth dates of each victim etched in them. There are also stones honoring the first responders who were there that day. Sadly, in an Instagram post 1 year after the tragedy, on the driver Scott Lisanickia's wife's page, she said, quote, "Been a year ago today since I lost you. So many memorials going on and they leave you out." End quote. I did notice this too in my research, that the driver is not mentioned nearly as much as the passengers, and I found it to be so sad. As is usually the case in the aftermath of a tragedy, people ponder the what ifs. What if the original party bus that the group had reserved had not broken down? What if Scott Lisanickia, the driver, had left the roadway before the limo began going so fast, before it picked up so much speed? What if he'd taken a different route to get to Cooperstown instead of the route that had the steep downhill grade? What if the passengers had been buckled into seatbelts? What if the limo had been a few minutes earlier or later? Would the two gentlemen in the Apple Barrel parking lot have been spared? But the biggest and most important what if of all, what if the owner of the limo had just done what they were supposed to do and maintained the vehicle properly? This tragic, heartbreaking accident probably would never have happened at all. Thank you guys so much for being here and listening to my new podcast, All Available Units Respond. I really and truly appreciate it so much. And thank you extra today for sticking with me through this cold or whatever I've come down with. I know my voice is cracking and I'm mouth breathing and I'm swallowing and I'm doing all of that weird stuff, but I really appreciate you guys so much for sticking it out. And these microphones, they pick up everything. It's like you're doing ASMR even though you're not trying to. And they pick up all these little weird sounds that you're making with your mouth. I mean, you can't even like swallow or breathe normally like a person because it just picks it up. And I know that really bugs some people, but I'm sorry that I'm not feeling well. And I had to get this out because it's been so long that it just should have been out a while ago. I don't even remember now. I know Thanksgiving was in there and all that, but anyway, I'm rambling. I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time to episode 5. And don't forget that I have another podcast. It's called Tell Me a True Crime Story. And please subscribe to both of them so you won't miss any episodes. Also rate and review the podcast for me. Please give me 5 stars and write a review. That would help me out so much. And that would, help to spread the word, share the podcast, all that. So thanks again and hugs to all of you. Bye-bye.